Greetings fellow noob, and welcome to this little guide about the most essential practice tool in Surf, Savelocs. We are gonna get into what they are good for, and how to best use them. After that, we are also gonna look at some other practice tools, some almost as important as Saveloc, some rather obscure and weird. But let's start with the basics. What is a Saveloc? It's quite simple. You press a button, the game records your current position, angle, and velocity, and then you press another button to return to that exact state. There's no delay or anything, which is why you usually press it a bunch of times and it looks kinda spammy. Of course, this isn't really a save game feature, you can't complete runs from a Saveloc, but it's an essential tool for practicing exactly the parts of a map that need practice and skip those that don't. Whether you're trying to complete a map with as little effort as possible or trying to optimize a run for milliseconds, Saveloc is the main tool that helps you to do that. Some of the stuff I'm going to show you later is a lot more advanced. Saveloc, however, is useful pretty much across all skill ranges, at least once you've learned the basics of Surf and start looking into tier 2 maps roughly. It's also not very complicated to set up, so let's see how that works first. To use Saveloc, you really only need 4 buttons. One for creating a Saveloc, one for returning to your current Saveloc, and then 2 for cycling back and forth between your existing Savelocs. Creating and returning are the most important ones. On Momentum Mod, you can assign these directly in the settings menu. Make sure you pick keys that are easy to reach. I'm using Q and E, for example. On KSF, you have to create these binds manually through the console. There's one extra thing to keep in mind on KSF. Before you can jump to a Saveloc, you have to disable the surf timer. Don't forget to turn it back on before you go for a real run. The other 2 buttons are for cycling between your existing Savelocs. On Momentum Mod, you can either use the Save State menu or bind them manually via the console using these 2 commands. On KSF, the equivalent commands are these. One last thing, Momentum's save state system is still in development, so some minor things may change over time. I'll note any updates in a pinned comment. Now that everything's set up, let's look at some practical ways to use Savelocs. A very common way to learn a map is to create a chain of Savelocs all the way from the start to the finish and then go backwards through them. So once you've reached the end, you repeatedly beat the map from progressively earlier Savelocs until you're eventually completing it from the start. This way you gain practice on every section of the map, especially the end where you would otherwise spend the least time, but that's often the hardest. You can also use Saveloc to find out what your best possible run on a map is. That way you can figure out if, for example, reaching a certain group is realistic before you dump tons of time and effort into it, because if you can't do it in Saveloc, you probably can't do it in a real run. There's a few rules of thumb for placing good Savelocs. Number 1, try and make them while in the air and not on a ramp, and number 2, make them while just going forward and not while turning. That's sometimes easier said than done, but it is what it is. When practicing a specific section, don't make the Saveloc right before that section, but a bit earlier. You want to have some breathing room after the Saveloc, and you also don't want the entry to always be exactly the same, because it's never going to be that way in an actual run. If a map has many different parts that need practice, I often find it better to jump back and forth between them instead of spending too long on any single one. On KSF, you can also access other people's Savelocs via this command. Surfers sometimes use this to help each other by showing how to beat a section from someone else's Saveloc, for example, or you can just use it to check out random Savelocs and see what you'll find. Staged maps are often easier to comp because they are staged, but they can make savelocking more complicated. If you're already on a later stage, entering Saveloc aborts your run. So for harder maps, it's a good idea to check for difficult sections in later stages first, for example by watching a replay. Replays are of course a super important practice tool in their own right. In Momentum you can access them via the tab menu. On KSF you can watch the WR for each map with /specbot, and you can get a VIP to run a more specific WR like a world record checkpoint via /replay. Another useful resource is the replay viewer on the KSF website. For most maps it lets you watch not just the WR but several other high-level runs as well. And then there's of course YouTube. Whichever way you pick, don't commit the super common beginner mistake of focusing way too much on WRs, because if you're struggling on a map, a WR is probably the least helpful replay you can watch. Instead, my advice is to scroll all the way down until you find a 16-year-old video in 240p made in Windows Movie Maker of some guy effortlessly comping the map with no turnbinds, no pre-strafe, and triple your sensitivity. That's what will actually help you. Another super important feature is Noclip. Noclip is the quickest and most straightforward way to explore a map, and it's super underused by beginners. Beyond seeing what's ahead of you, you can check angles, check if a surface resets you, and a lot of the time it's just good to get a different perspective of the map. On some maps, you can also find odd little secrets like this disco on Forbidden Tomb 3. Overall, there isn't much to say about Noclip that isn't obvious, but that doesn't mean it's not important. It's pretty much as important as Saveloc. And that pretty much covers the basic practice features. Now we are gonna get into some stuff that's rather advanced and specialized, basically stuff the average surfer doesn't even know exists, but even if you never end up using this yourself, I think it's still pretty cool to know about it. What you just saw wasn't some sort of editing magic, but the actual game running at about 1/3 of the normal speed. The command that allows you to fiddle with time in this miraculous way is host_timescale. Combined with Saveloc, host timescale is sort of like the nuclear option of practice tools. Typical use cases are sections that are very fast and highly technical, or optimizing something like a singular ramp down to a margin of a few units. Using host timescale in Momentum is fairly straightforward. Enable svcheats1 and then set host timescale to whatever value you want, maybe even keybind it. In CSS, things are more complicated. VIP status on KSF allows you to use some cheat-protected commands with surf timer disabled, but not host timescale, only the rather janky and inferior /speed feature. So in most cases, simply loading a map in Momentum and practicing it there is the most straightforward way. With maps that aren't added to Momentum's map pool, you can still load them via the console. A few maps won't work properly though. For example, some slant boosts won't give the correct amount of units. In those cases, or if you simply want to practice on CSS specifically, you have to set up your own dedicated server. The most straightforward way to do that, at least to my knowledge, is using the dedicated server bundle you can find in the KSF Discord. The setup may seem a little daunting, but it's actually much more straightforward than it looks, and with a little tinkering you should be able to set up pretty much whichever practice environment you want. One fairly niche option is to practice maps on different tick rates. The tick rate directly affects your unit gain, so increasing it makes most maps much easier, while lowering it is a little like training with weights around your ankles. KSF does of course have 100 tick servers, but other than that you'll have to use Momentum or again the dedicated server. In both cases it's quite easy to set up. Its utility as a practice tool comes with some caveats because it warps the game's physics at a fairly fundamental level, but at the very least it can be used for interesting challenges or experiments. And finally, there are commands that change the way maps look on a visual level. All of these are very situational. On a few maps these can be extremely helpful to the point of being basically game-breaking. On most they are not useful at all. This is just a small selection of the slightly less obscure ones. Here, for example, I'm using draw clip brushes to display an invisible wall that blocks a rather difficult skip. That's of course a fairly extreme example. On KSF, the more invasive ones are VIP features and cheat protected. On Momentum, some of them currently aren't. Overall, I treat them as practice tools that aren't going to be useful often, but very useful if they are. And that's pretty much all the stuff I could think of when it comes to Saveloc and practice tools. Again, if you're a beginner, don't worry too much about the more advanced stuff. Stick to Saveloc, Noclip, and replays, and remember using replays in a way that's actually helpful to you. If I forgot anything useful, or if you have some cursed practice tool that I've never heard of, feel free to leave it in the comments. Also, thanks to these lovely individuals who answered questions, gave feedback, or pointed me towards things I otherwise would have missed. If you enjoyed the guide, consider checking out some of my other surf guides, like the one about pre-strafes, for example. Otherwise, thanks for watching and good luck with your runs. See ya!